My clients, Ray and Sarah, were each injured in separate car accidents. But who walked away with the larger settlement and how much bigger was it? We're breaking it down into 9 key factors that shape their cases, awarding money or taking away money for each factor. I'll then reveal who came out on top and exactly how much they got. Ray was driving down the street in Miami when an oncoming van made a left turn. They crashed. Ray didn't have car insurance, and after the crash, he worried how he'd fix his car and get to work. In another part of Miami, Sarah was driving on an expressway when a car was heading in the opposite direction. The other driver made a left turn and Sarah crashed into her. Sarah had 3 kids depending on her, and she was also driving without insurance. With her SUV totaled, she wondered how she'd juggle groceries, school drop-offs, and getting to work without a car. In Ray's case, his car struck the van. Sarah hit the oncoming car, but then she crashed into a sign and damaged it. The car that Sarah hit also sustained major damage. The more impacts that you have in an accident, the more your pain and suffering is worth. One reason for this is because multiple impacts in an accident typically cause more serious physical trauma. So we'll add an extra $500 in pain and suffering for Sarah because she had 2 impacts. Ray just had 1 impact. Sarah's airbag deployed, but Ray's didn't. When your airbag deploys, it usually means the crash was serious. Insurance companies see that as a sign that you likely had a hard impact. This increases the chance of injuries like whiplash, fractures, or even internal damage. Also, airbag deployment can make the claim worth more because it helps prove your injuries were caused by the accident. Airbags often cause extra injuries like burns or bruising, which can add to your medical bills and the pain you experienced. Insurance adjusters sometimes pay more because the crash looks more serious and they want to avoid the risk of a lawsuit. We're going to add $1,000 for Sarah's pain and suffering for her airbag deploying. Ray only had 1 lane of travel in his direction, and Sarah had 3 lanes of travel in her direction. Sarah was in the far right lane, so the other driver could try to blame Sarah for failing to see her and not stopping in time. Since Ray had less time to stop, it's easier for Ray to show that the other driver was at fault. This is huge because your case isn't as easy as just showing someone else is at fault. Even if you can do that, the insurance company then looks at whether you were at fault, and your case value gets lowered by your percentage at fault. So if Sarah was just 10% or 15% at fault, that cuts the value of her case by 10 to 15%, and that can be a huge blow to her case. You may recall that I told you that Ray's accident happened in Miami and Sarah's happened in another part of town. So both trials would be in Miami-Dade County. This matters because when valuing your case, insurance companies look at where the trial will take place. Jurors in big cities tend to award more than jurors in smaller rural cities. So a case in Miami-Dade County is worth more than a case in a rural county in North Florida. We're assuming everything else is equal, meaning similar injuries, similar accidents, you get the point. So this factor is a tie since both of their cases would end up in the same county. Sarah's car sustained an enormous amount of damage. Ray's car had damage, but it was much less than Sarah's. Sarah was clearly in a high-speed crash, but the bigger effect of having a huge amount of damage to your car is the following. The insurance company is more likely to believe that your injuries were caused by the crash. This is particularly true if you are claiming an injury like whiplash, pain in your neck, your back, shoulder, or any body part, a concussion or minor traumatic brain injury, a herniated disc, or a tear of your ligament, tendon, or muscle. Since Sarah had a ton of damage to her SUV, we're going to add $2,000 for Sarah's pain and suffering and $1,500 to Ray's pain and suffering. Of course, they each also had a separate property damage claim against the other drivers. Sarah was burned a bit by the airbag and had a black eye, which was likely from striking the airbag. Ray didn't have any bruises or burns. Fortunately, Sarah's burns and black eye went away. We'll still give her $2,000 for her pain and suffering for those temporary injuries. Paramedics came to Sarah's accident scene and took her to the hospital. In Ray's case, the police officer said that there were no injuries. When an ambulance takes you to the hospital directly from the accident scene, it signals a sense of urgency and severity about your injuries. This can increase the value of your pain and suffering claim for several reasons. Using an ambulance shows that medical professionals believed your injuries were serious enough to require urgent care. Insurance adjusters and juries often perceive this as a sign that the accident caused major harm. That justifies higher compensation for your pain and suffering. If you've been injured in an accident in Florida or on a cruise and you think someone else may be at fault, click the link in the description below to see if I could be the lawyer for you. Ambulance and hospital records provide immediate and detailed documentation of your injuries and symptoms right after the accident. This creates a strong connection between the accident and your medical condition. It makes it harder for insurers to argue your injuries are unrelated or exaggerated. Delays in seeking medical attention can lead insurers to claim that your injuries weren't severe or weren't caused by the accident. Being taken to the hospital right away eliminates any gap in treatment, reinforcing the seriousness of your case. Juries and adjusters may interpret ambulance transport as a visible and dramatic impact on your life. This emphasizes the physical and the emotional toll of the accident. So we're going to add another $2,000 to Sarah's case for taking an ambulance to the hospital. Ray's girlfriend drove him to the hospital just hours after the accident. The sooner that you get treatment after your crash, the more money you'll likely get for pain and suffering. This is because it shows that you likely had more pain. To reveal the next factor, imagine you're on a first date with someone you're really attracted to. Suddenly, everything they say sounds more interesting and their jokes are funnier. And even if they spill their drink, you brush it off like it's adorable. That's the halo effect at work, when one positive trait like physical attractiveness makes us see everything else about a person more favorably. This same psychological phenomenon often plays a role in car accident injury cases, especially when it comes to pain and suffering awards. Jurors are human, and whether they realize it or not, they're more likely to sympathize with or pay attention to someone they find attractive. They might subconsciously feel that the person suffering is more unfair, or that their story is more compelling simply because they're drawn to them. Think about why certain YouTube videos or movies get millions of views when they feature attractive people. It's not always the content, but the connection viewers feel. In the courtroom, jurors are more likely to connect with an attractive female plaintiff, paying closer attention to their story. This increased engagement often leads to higher pain and suffering awards. It's not fair, but in a world where perception matters, it's reality. So for Sarah, being attractive might add $1,000 or much more to her pain and suffering award. This is because jurors are likely to feel an extra layer of connection and compassion for her situation. Now, what about for us men? Unfortunately, looks don't have the same effect in these situations. Even though he's good looking, Ray gets no money for this factor. At the hospital, Ray's main complaint was upper back pain. Sarah's primary complaints were pain in her nose, back, and neck. They both got a CT scan and MRI of their back. Ray showed that he had a small fracture to the vertebra in his upper back. Those fractures are painful. A fracture, also called a broken bone, is a big deal in a personal injury case. It adds major value to your pain and suffering claim, even if you have a small fracture. I'm going to assign $50,000 for pain and suffering for Ray's small spinal vertebra fracture. The MRI showed that Ray had 2 disc herniations in his lower back. Juries often award between $25,000 and $50,000 for pain and suffering for a disc herniation. If you treat for 6 months to a year or more, it may increase the value. We're going to assign $37,500 for pain and suffering for each of Ray's herniated discs, so we'll add $75,000 to his case. An x-ray showed that Sarah broke her nose, but not all fractures are worth the same. A simple broken nose without a deviated septum is worth around $25,000 for pain and suffering. So we'll add $25,000 for Sarah's nose fracture. The hospital let Sarah go after several hours, while Ray stayed there for a whopping 6 days. An MRI showed that Sarah had 2 disc herniations in her lower back and 2 bulging discs in her neck. But one of her lower back disc herniations wasn't caused by this crash. She already had it before the crash. In fact, she even had surgery to it before the crash. After an accident, you're entitled to any worsening of your pre-existing condition. So Sarah was entitled to compensation for the extent to which the crash worsened her herniated disc in her back. We'll give Sarah $37,500 for her pain and suffering for her 2 herniated discs. Ray and Sarah both got therapy for their back pain. Sarah got a nerve block injection and got the nurse to video it. I sent the video to the other driver's insurance company to show them that this was serious. Ray got an epidural steroid injection for his herniated disc in his lower back. We'll give Sarah and Ray each $25,000 for their injection. Ray's hospital bill was around $99,000. His Medicaid health plan wouldn't pay it, so we'll add $99,000 for his medical bills. Sarah's health insurance paid some of her bills, and she owed the hospital and her doctors around $14,000. Her health insurance company demanded that she pay them back over $3,800 for the bills that they paid. That's called a health insurance lien. Normally, we'd add her medical bills and the health insurance lien to her case value. This would be $17,800, but the other driver gets a $10,000 credit in Florida since Sarah didn't have car insurance, so we'll only add $7,800 to her case value. So this brings Ray's case value to $251,500. Just like with pain and suffering, the other driver is liable for your medical bills if they're at fault. Geico insured the driver who hit Sarah. CNA insured the van that hit Ray. Those insurance companies are about equal in terms of paying injury claims, so we won't add any additional money for either. If Sarah got surgery, it would likely add at least $100,000 to her pain and suffering claim. And then we'd also need to add the medical bills for surgery, but Sarah didn't want to have surgery to her back. The driver that hit Sarah only had $100,000 in bodily injury liability insurance. That's the insurance that pays for your medical bills, lost wages, and pain and suffering. And the other driver, unfortunately, didn't have any assets. I put a ton of pressure on Geico to pay the $100,000 limits. Sarah's case was worth over $3,800 more than their insurance coverage. I sent Geico jury verdicts showing that herniated discs are valuable injuries. After putting a ton of pressure on the other driver's insurance to pay, I got Geico to pay the maximum $100,000 of insurance. After my lawyer's fees, costs, and paying her medical bills, she got over $56,500 in her pocket, and she was thrilled. The other driver in Ray's case had plenty of insurance. He was driving for a successful business. They had a huge insurance policy. But Ray's doctor said that he wasn't even sure if Ray's fracture was caused by the crash. That decreases the case value. This is because if Ray sued, the other driver's insurance company will hire a doctor to examine him. Take one guess what the insurance company doctor would say about Ray's injuries. In most cases, they'd say that the accident didn't cause his injury, and that would be terrible for his case. After a battle with the van's insurance company in Ray's case, I got them to offer $150,000 for his injury claim, and that's when things got really interesting. But first, remember how I said that Ray's medical health plan wouldn't pay his $99,000 hospital bill? Well, I got them to pay, and if we were able to settle Ray's case, this would put close to an additional $96,000 in Ray's pocket. So were we able to settle Ray's case? Yes, I aggressively fought for Ray and got the van's insurance company to pay $260,000 to settle. After my lawyer's fees and paying his medical bills, Ray got around $160,000 in his pocket. I reveal a similar case where I compare two car accidents and one of them gets a large payout in the video that's on screen, link in the description below, so watch it now. And if you've been injured in a car accident in Florida and think that someone else may be at fault, click the link in the description below to see if I could be the lawyer for you.